Can I first remind everyone to silence your mobile phones? Let me also remind anyone who plans to speak from a prepared text, please provide that text to the Secretariat if at all possible so that our interpreters will have an easier time. Colleagues, the agenda of this meeting has been circulated. Can I please invite you to adopt the agenda? Are there any objections? Seeing no objections, the agenda is adopted. Does anyone wish to speak against the draft agenda? Oops, I just pulled a Joe Biden and read everything on my page. Excuse me. Thank you. I'll now yield to myself for opening comments. Dear colleagues, first of all, I want to give a big thanks to our Canadian friends for hosting us here in the beautiful city of Vancouver. We've all been looking forward to this annual session, especially after the 2020 annual session here was canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I know all of us on the committee are thrilled to be here today. My friends, in our recent meetings, I've repeatedly made the point that we can't just go about business as usual. Too many are suffering and dying. We cannot afford to waste time. We need to put all our efforts into ending Russia's genocidal war. It's hard to find the right words to express the outrage and condemnation we feel about the atrocities Russia is inflicting on the Ukraine and its people. For this reason, I'm grateful for the presence of the Ukrainian delegation and their active participation in this committee. To my Ukrainian friends, I know it is a lot for you to come all the way here, but through your lived experience and understanding of this war, you help us to do more and to do better to support Ukrainian victory. Slava Ukraini. The Russian Federation continues its illegal military invasion and aggressive war against Ukraine, targeting civilians, destroying infrastructure, and committing unspeakable acts of violence, including torture, rape, and murder. This madness must stop. We must stand united and strong to show the world that the OSCE EPA will not tolerate aggression and will protect the values we all signed up for. The invasion is a blatant attack on the Helsinki Final Act, plain and simple. We made that clear last year in Birmingham when we denounced Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and we must do it again here. And we'll keep doing it as long as it takes. At our winter meeting in Vienna, we didn't mince words when we condemned Russia's aggression, even with their delegation in the room. We demonstrated our unity and made it clear that violence and aggression won't be tolerated in this assembly. Today, we need to keep that spirit alive and show our unity against Russia's aggression and its efforts to undermine the OSCE and its institutions, including this body. Our assembly has been loud and clear about our principles. Over the past year, we've been working hard to support Ukraine, amplify their voice, and provide assistance where it's most needed. In particular, I want to highlight OSCE PA Special Representatives Dr. Daniel de Ritter and Reinhold Lopaka for their tireless effort in support of this Assembly's work in Eastern Europe and parliamentary dialogue on Ukraine. The Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and its continued clear, gross, and uncorrected violations of the Helsinki Final Act and OSCE values is causing unimaginable suffering for the Ukrainian people. This war is an attack on European security and growing threat to global peace. Russia's dangerous rhetoric about using nuclear weapons, on top of its complete disregard for international security mechanisms and military transparency, like the Vienna Document and Code of Conduct, pose significant risks to European and whole OSCE region. Russia's announced withdrawal from the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty also underscores its reckless and bad faith approach to arms control and confidence building measures. The consequences could be dire for the citizens that we all represent as parliamentarians. Meanwhile, recent events show us that Putin's use of deniable mercenary formations like the Wagner Group not only breeds corruption and inflicts terror on Ukraine, Africa, and the Middle East, but can also be a major destabilizing factor within Russia itself, with potential global implications. Colleagues, Our committee discussions today are absolutely crucial, and I'm sure our efforts here will be productive. I'm confident that the work we do in the next few days will show unwavering support for the people of Ukraine and send a message to Russia and the world that we see Moscow's imperial warmongering and genocide for what it is. This matters. Ukraine fights and wins not because of its material superiority, but the righteousness of its cause and the morale of its courageous and heroic people. Their suffering and hardship are only outweighed by their strong desire for freedom. Our solidarity and support make a real difference towards winning the fight and further isolating Russia's criminal regime internationally. As always, I want to thank my fellow committee officers, Vice Chairman Costel Donava, and our Rapporteur, Lorenas Kashunas. Our Rapporteur has put together a terrific and comprehensive document that we'll be using as the basis for our work this week. So many thanks to dear Lorenas for your hard work with the help of the International Secretariat. I know we're all eager to hear from you. Finally, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for the commitment you demonstrate being here and for your willingness to contribute to our important work during these dangerous times. I am looking forward to our discussions and exchanges over the next few days. The committee is scheduled to meet 4 times during our session. Our first task will be to debate our Rapporteur's report titled Strengthening Regional Security by Fostering Democratic and Inclusive Societies, the Role of the OSCE EPA. We will also consider amendments on his draft resolution. Time permitting, we may start that process today. We have 27 amendments tabled to the draft resolution, which are available outside the room on the documents table and are also available on the app. In addition, this committee has been tasked by the Standing Committee to debate and consider 4 supplementary items covering the following issues: a draft resolution on the Wagner Group's terroristic nature and actions proposed by Mr. Reinhold Lopatka from Austria, a draft resolution on clarifying the consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine in terms of adherence to OSCE principles proposed by Dr. Daniel de Ritter from Germany. 7 amendments have been proposed to this supplementary item. A draft resolution on future generations proposed by Ms. Farah Karimi from the Netherlands. And finally, a draft resolution on the Republic of Moldova proposed by Mr. Dan Barna from Romania. 1 amendment has been tabled to this last supplementary item. Amendments are available in the usual way. We will consider the supplementary items when our main business on the draft resolution is concluded. May I remind colleagues that the election of committee officers for the next annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session, which is likely to take place on Monday, the 3rd of July at 9:00 a.m. I've been asked to put before the committee a proposal for Secretariat for a change to the deadline of candidate nominations. This is to allow sufficient time for the arrangements for the election to be made ahead of our meeting on Monday morning. The same proposal is being put forth in all general committees. Under Rule 36, Paragraph 5, the Secretariat would like to ask the committee to agree that the deadline for nominations for the committee officers shall not be later than 6 p.m. on the afternoon of Sunday, 2nd of July, rather than the start of the Monday meeting as is the normal case. Just to be clear, we normally allow nominations right up until the start of that final session. The Secretariat has asked that we set a deadline of 6 p.m. the night before so that they have time to prepare in the case that there are contested elections. As I am standing for re-election myself, I told the Secretariat if we're going to make this change, I want the committee to make the change. And so I put it before you now to see if there are any objections to making this change on nominations. Are there any objections? Seeing not, the proposal is adopted. We will now move on to consideration of the report and draft resolution, strengthening regional security by fostering democratic and inclusive societies, the role of the OSCE EPA. I would now like to give the floor to our excellent rapporteur of this committee, Ms. Lorenas Kashunas of Lithuania. I'd be grateful if you could help us organize our debate by registering any interventions for the debate as soon as possible. Mr. Kashunas, you have the floor.
So good morning. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, dear colleagues. I feel quite strange this time because, we tabled our report one and a half month ago. And, and Russia exploded during that time the Novokakhovka Dam. The private army, Wagner, started a coup in Russia and made a house, and you should know to have time even to react to that. So this is not that in my report. I will maybe tackle it and discuss it during our these discussions. So how it shows how in what kind of difficult times we are, in what kind of chaotic times we are, and it's so important to have fast reactions to that. So, dear colleagues, while conflicts across OSCE area have been erupting throughout the entire history of the OSCE, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine remains the greatest bleeding wound of the European continent, as well as the most serious challenge to European security since end of World War II. The current security situation in Europe is very challenging and will remain so as long as the Russian aggression in Ukraine continues and Russia's actions pose a threat to Europe. Therefore, the work of the word of our Assembly should not only condemn the war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine, but also focus on the role of OSCE and its Parliamentary Assembly in assisting Ukraine to defend itself. When Russia mobilized its troops at its borders with Ukraine, Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zbigniew Rau, the OSCE chairman in office in 2022, offered an additional platform for dialogue and diplomacy to prevent the war. On February 8, 2022, during the inaugural meeting of OSCE Renewed European Security Dialogue held in Vienna, all OSCE participating states, except Russia and Belarus, reconfirmed their commitment to OSCE founding principles and their standing in readiness to address relevant security issues through dialogue in a comprehensive way. Throughout the last winter, Russian forces targeted Ukrainian energy and heating infrastructure, undermining the individual security of every Ukrainian. The situation around Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is also very alarming and creates an unprecedented risk of nuclear and environmental disaster. The weaponization of energy must be condemned. On the other hand, we can observe a disturbing deterioration of the situation with nuclear threats fueled by threatening rhetoric of Russia and its withdrawal from international nuclear non-proliferation agreements, as well as the destruction of a Novokakhovka Dam by the Russian occupation forces, alarmed by the implication of this brutal criminal act for people's livelihood, natural environment, and economy of the region. It is a crime of ecocide, and I call upon the parliaments of the participating states to enshrine this concept in their national and international law. Russia should be held accountable for that, and all perpetrators must be punished. According to credible and alarming reports, for the past 17 months, and at this very moment, with unthinkable brutality and cruelty, Russian armed forces are destroying Ukrainian towns, residential buildings, schools, and hospitals, intentionally targeting, torturing, raping, and killing thousands of innocent civilians, including children. These acts might be considered as war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly must highlight the disproportionate impact of the war on the displaced population, in particular women and children. And in this regard, the focus of the work of the Ad hoc Committee on Migration on these issues is crucial. The scale of Russia's atrocities committed in Ukraine since 24 February 2022 is extremely alarming. As Ukraine continues liberating all of its territories currently occupied by Russia, criminal acts carried out by the Russian Federation will continue to be documented further. So it is important for OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to also pay very close attention to the crimes committed in Ukraine and support the engagement of Parliamentary Assembly's Special Rapporteur on War Crimes in Ukraine, Mr. John Whittingale, in these matters. It is important to allocate all available resources to put an end to the atrocities committed by Russian troops in Ukraine, investigate them, and bring all those responsible to account. The international community must employ all options available, including the establishment of special international tribunal to prosecute possible war crime against Ukraine. In this context, the aggression to establish the International Center for the Prosecution of a Crime of Aggression against Ukraine in The Hague is a significant step towards international justice. It is also important to remind that Russia's violation of United Nations and OSCE founding principles did not begin on February 24 last year. There is a long list of Russia's actions which have been undermining international security for a long time. Among others, it includes breaching arms control instruments, violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, systematically violating international human rights law and international humanitarian law, and weaponizing energy as well as distorting history and spreading disinformation and carrying on political repressions at home on an unprecedented scale. We should not lose our focus on Russia's continued occupation of Georgia's Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region, which are also affected by the deteriorating level of regional security. This situation has not seen any positive developments. OSCE should remind and urge the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Russian military forces from occupied Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region, in line with the European Union mediated ceasefire agreement of 2008 August. The past year has been increased tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan, with fighting and clashes taking place along the state border and servicemen losing their lives or being wounded, while the movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo through the Lanchin corridor remains impeded. A comprehensive and sustainable peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan is a fundamental for long-lasting peace and security in the South Caucasus, and all participating states should collaborate constructively in the good faith to support both countries in overcoming any remaining obstacles that prevent the realization of this treaty. Dear colleagues, over the years, OSCE participating states have been working to strengthen mutual trust, transparency, and predictability, to mitigate risks, to promote stability and security in OSCE area. Together, we developed a framework of mutually reinforcing arms control agreements and confidence-building measures, as well as a comprehensive series of commitments in all three OSCE dimensions. Strengthening security on the European continent. However, Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine seriously damaged the entire OSCE security framework. We can no longer tolerate this. Therefore, the participating states and partners of OSCE must implement a zero-tolerance governance regarding any violations of fundamental OSCE principles, including war crimes and human rights violations. The Assembly's rule of procedures need to be amended in order to ensure that in the case of these violations, the credentials of a national parliamentary delegation of a state committing the violation shall be challenged. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly should consider developing a sanctions mechanism to be applied to the delegation until there are significant changes in the policy of violating state. We should also demand that Russia immediately and unconditionally release all OSCE staff members detained by their forces and proxies in the occupied areas of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Lorenas. The floor is now open for debate. The time limit for speeches is 3 minutes. If there are many members wishing to speak, I may reduce the time limit to try to accommodate as many people as possible. I will begin by giving the floor to our Vice Chair, Mr. Kostel Donava, to be followed by Ms. Paula Cardoza, the Head of Delegation of Portugal. Mr. Donava, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Richard. Dear colleagues, first of all, I want to congratulate our Canadian colleagues for Canada's National Day. And also, I want to thank them for organizing this annual session in Vancouver. I want to thank also to Lorinas for the extensive report of our committee. More than a year after the illegal, illegitimate, and unprovoked Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, the solidarity of the entire international community for Ukraine remains of utmost importance. The international support for Ukraine, for its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity is in fact support for the rule-based international order. Ukraine is rightfully and legally acting in self-defense in accordance with the UN Charter. Russia, with the support of Belarus, violated the values, principles, and commitments emerging from international law. These are the basis of mutual relations, thereby challenging the fundamental principles of the international security architecture based on peace led to a loss of mutual trust. Collective responses and actions of support are needed. As we all know, many countries are closely coordinating actions to combat rising prices and tackle supply shortages. New challenges have emerged, but prospects of cooperation have proven feasible and promising. Many outreach efforts were undertaken so far at various levels, and many were aimed at countries from the global south. Our position towards Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not about taking sides in a conflict. It is about publicly telling the cold truth. Russia is the aggressor, and Ukraine is legitimate in defending its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. We need to cooperate, including at parliamentary level, to send a clear message. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has profound and worrying consequences to the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize Ms. Paula Cardozo of Portugal to be followed by Mr. Ben Cardin of the United States. Ms. Cardozo, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Portugal congratulates the rapporteur for this report. It's very important to know how things are happening in Europe. And I'm a bit concerned with the future, and I have some questions even for the future. What Europe will outcome in the end of this war we all want to end? We support the Ukraine. We support the people of Ukraine and their resilience, but we are going to achieve to a new Europe after that. We have new stakeholders, new civil societies, new rules, the minorities and the new radical movements growing, and what Europe and what security for Europe after the war. How would come Russia? Is it we are going to a road that Russia are alone? No one supports Russia in Europe, and it's okay, it's very well. But whom they are going to turn? That's important to think about it. Because they are going to turn to Asia, to Africa, to South America. it's important to think about it and to answer these questions for the future of the Europe, for the all against one as a price. And we should be prepared to the price. And they are proudly alone, but they are going to turn to another countries, in another geographies, and I think these committees should think a little bit about this and be prepared for a new Russia. And we have to have a strong new Europe for this and to be prepared for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now recognize Mr. Ben Cardin for the United States to be followed by Mr. Attila Tilke from Hungary. Mr. Cardin, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to congratulate the rapporteur for an excellent report and resolution for our consideration. And it was great pride as the chair of the U.S., the head of the U.S. delegation, to recognize Richard Hudson for his extraordinary leadership on this committee. We are Democrats, Republicans, House members, Senate members here from the U.S. delegation, and we are united in our support for Ukraine. The theme of this Vancouver conference is strengthening regional security by fostering democratic and inclusive societies. It's absolutely essential that we recognize that Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is the most serious challenge to European security since the end of World War II. Our responsibilities as parliamentarians. We have responsibilities in our own individual countries to make sure that we do what's right in supporting Ukraine. I am proud of the work that we've done in the United States Congress, working with the administration to make sure that the United States provides the necessary military and humanitarian support for Ukraine. We all need to do that. As parliamentarians here in the Parliamentary Assembly, we must speak out in strong support for Ukraine, and we must act to make it clear that each of us have responsibilities in our own country to provide the necessary support. And yes, we, the Helsinki hallmark is to make sure there's accountability for gross violations of human rights. Russia has total disregard for human dignity and the severe atrocities and brutality that it has done, genocide. It's absolutely essential that we support a special international tribunal for the war crimes and crimes against humanity that have been committed by the Russian Federation. We've already taken some action in this parliamentary assembly by establishing a special ad hoc committee for Ukraine. Let's make sure that we are united in the Vancouver Declaration for our support for Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. We'll now recognize Mr. Attila Tilke from Hungary to be followed by Mr. Luis Gracia from Portugal. Mr. Tilke, you have the floor.
Thank
3
you
minutes.
for the floor, Mr. Chair. The national humanitarian, the Hungarian government position on the war in Ukraine is clear. We cannot allow Hungary to be dragged into an armed conflict, but we will continue helping all those who are fleeing from the war. I live on the eastern side of Hungary. My election district is near the Ukrainian border. In my area, there are 5 border crossing points, so every refugee who wanted to go to European Union via Hungary have to escape across my area. More than 1 million refugees arrived from Ukraine since the war broke out. Our government started organization humanitarian aid at the same as the Russian-Ukrainian war conflict broke out. By managing the work of national defense forces, the police, the disaster management, the government offices, the municipalities, health workers, charitable organizations, and volunteers, the care of refugees is continuous and covers everything, for asylum procedures to care of patients arriving in our country. The government also coordinates accommodation of refugees from Ukraine. The government is coordinating the collection and delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the work of domestic aid agencies through the National Coordination Council, whose task is to coordinate charitable activities in emergency situations. The National Humanitarian Coordination Council includes the 6 charities and government actors. There was a day, the 10th of March, when the number of refugees were more than 25,000. After the war broke out, at the end of February and in March and in April, every day from morning till night, I was there and I worked there near the border to organize the work and to solve the problems. Hungary must stay out of the war. We recognize Ukraine's right to self-defense, but do not put Ukraine's interests before our own. Hungary is committed to peace. We don't advocate war rhetoric. The most important task is to save human lives, and this can only be done through the peace. That will guarantee long-term stability and security for European continent. However, this request is a realistic approach involving all parties concerned. A diplomatic settlement is only possible if the parties are willing to negotiate, which requires open channels of communication. Thank you for the floor, and I would like to congratulate for the report, Mr. Castellanos.
Thank you. I will now recognize Mr. Luis Gracia from Portugal to be followed by Ms. Christina Machado from Canada. Mr. Gracia, you have the floor. Not here. So Christina Machado from Canada, you are now recognized to be followed by Mr. Wicker from the United States. You're recognized for 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci au rapporteur pour le dépôt de cet important rapport. Chers collègues, depuis le début de son invasion illégale de l'Ukraine, la Russie a démontré un comportement menaçant, dangereux et imprudent en ce qui a trait à l'énergie et l'armement nucléaire. D'une part, les dirigeants russes, dont le président Poutine, ont menacé à plusieurs reprises d'utiliser l'arme nucléaire. D'autre part, la Russie continue ses actions irresponsables à proximité des installations nucléaires de l'Ukraine, faisant peser une menace importante de tragédie nucléaire. Le rapport note la situation alarmante en lien avec la centrale nucléaire de Zaporijjia, ce qui crée un risque considérable de catastrophe nucléaire et environnementale. Le rapport condamne également la rhétorique menaçante de Russie et le retrait de cette dernière des accords internationaux de non-prolifération nucléaire. Rappelons-nous qu'en 1985, le président américain Ronald Reagan et le secrétaire général soviétique Mikhail Gorbatchev déclaraient qu'une guerre nucléaire ne peut être gagnée et ne doit jamais être menée. En janvier 2022, soit un mois avant son invasion de l'Ukraine, la Russie et les autres membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU réitéraient ce principe. Pourtant, malgré cet engagement, le président Poutine continue d'utiliser une rhétorique nucléaire menaçante. Le déploiement d'armes nucléaires russes sur le territoire du Bélarus est une provocation imprudente qui va d'ailleurs à l'encontre des engagements internationaux du Bélarus. La rhétorique et les actions offensives de la Russie s'inscrivent dans une stratégie globale d'intimidation à laquelle nous ne céderons pas. La communauté de l'OSCE continuera de soutenir l'Ukraine. Le mois dernier, lors d'une visite à Hiroshima, les dirigeants du G7 ont publié leur vision sur le désarmement nucléaire, dans laquelle ils ont condamné la rhétorique nucléaire dangereuse de la Russie et ont souligné l'importance des 77 années de non-utilisation des armes nucléaires. Cette initiative nous rappelle l'importance de l'éducation et de la sensibilisation au désarmement et à la non-prolifération. Quant à la question des attaques et comportements imprudents de la Russie à proximité de la centrale nucléaire de Zaporijjia, depuis qu'elle a été saisie par les forces militaires russes il y a plus d'1 an, la centrale a été coupée du réseau électrique ukrainien à plusieurs reprises en raison de frappes russes, laissant craindre des accidents nucléaires. À la suite de la dernière panne, le directeur général de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique a lancé un appel à l'action émouvant, avertissant que ce n'est qu'une question de temps avant qu'une catastrophe ne se produise. Soutenir les efforts de surveillance des centrales nucléaires en Ukraine par l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique en vue d'assurer qu'elles fonctionnent en toute sécurité doit demeurer une priorité pour tous les États participants de l'OSCE. Ultimement, les menaces qui pèsent sur l'Ukraine et le monde sont le résultat de l'invasion et l'occupation illégale de l'Ukraine par la Russie et de ses comportements et rhétoriques menaçantes. En ces temps difficiles, la communauté internationale doit faire preuve du plus haut niveau de solidarité et d'unité dans ses engagements en faveur de la sécurité mondiale. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. And I want to thank the speakers for keeping within the 3 minutes. You're doing a great job. So I'll next recognize Mr. Roger Wicker from the United States, to be followed by Ms. Valerie Boyer from France. Mr. Wicker, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, fellow delegates and members of the OSCE EPA. Let's be very clear about what the facts are. The Russian Federation's actions in Ukraine violate the fundamental principles of the Helsinki Final Act, and that cannot be tolerated. We and the watching world must support a comprehensive investigation of Russian war crimes, and we must support the prosecution of those responsible. We also must condemn Russia's energy blackmail as they target Ukraine's basic infrastructure and the energy security of the rest of the continent. The Russians' irresponsible actions imperil regional stability and set a dangerous precedent for global energy security. Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine also amounts to a humanitarian catastrophe, a clear violation of international law, and an urgent threat to European security and global peace. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly must strongly condemn, and with this item before us, will strongly condemn Russia's actions in no uncertain terms. We must also send support to the Ukrainian people and send a clear message that Moscow's brazen act of aggression will not be tolerated. Now, fellow members of the Parliamentary Assembly and of the First Committee, this is the first time that I have been before you as the ranking member of the United States Senate Committee on Armed Services. And in that regard, let me say, the United States has supported the war effort in Ukraine by some $130 billion of American taxpayer money. I want to thank the other members of our European community for sending their support, their financial support, to the Ukrainian military. The Ukrainians are not asking us as members of the OSCE to do their fighting for them. They're not asking us to send troops. They're simply asking us to give them the financial means and the resources to get the job done. I will say to my fellow members of this committee and my fellow members of the Assembly, we in the United States very much appreciate the contributions that have come from the various members of the Parliamentary Assembly. I thank you for that. To the extent that Europeans continue supporting the delivery of resources and arms to the Ukrainian military, it helps us very much on the American side to make the case, to continue to make the case for support of this very worthy effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wicker. So I will now recognize Mr. Luc Berthold from Canada to be followed by Ms. Valerie Boyer from France. Mr. Berthold, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Hudson, Monsieur Kashuna. D'abord, permettez-moi de vous souhaiter encore une fois la bienvenue au Canada, à cette journée de la fête du Canada. Je vous souhaite une bonne journée de festivité. Je vous invite à en profiter. Je crois que les mots du rapport sont très clairs et on doit se les rappeler pour s'assurer que les gens sont parfaitement au fait de pourquoi on est tous réunis ici aujourd'hui pour parler de l'importance de se tenir unis face à la terrible agression de la Fédération de Russie sur l'Ukraine avec la complicité éhontée du Bélarus. Je veux juste citer 2 paragraphes de la résolution, notamment celui qui rappelle que la guerre d'agression de la Russie contre l'Ukraine constitue une violation de tous les principes de l'acte final d'Helsinki, ainsi qu'une transgression absolue des principes de la Charte de Paris pour une nouvelle Europe et de la Charte des Nations unies. Et c'est pourquoi, dans ce paragraphe, on dit qu'on doit exprimer un soutien indéfectible à l'indépendance, à la souveraineté et à l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine, ainsi qu'au droit naturel de ce pays de se défendre contre une agression extérieure. Et je reviens aussi au paragraphe 6, où on doit effectivement, comme Assemblée, condamner avec la plus grande fermeté les attaques délibérées de la Russie contre les zones résidentielles et les infrastructures essentielles de l'Ukraine, y compris les réseaux de chauffage, d'électricité, les écoles, les hôpitaux, les églises, les lieux de culte, et les attaques prenant délibérément pour cible des civils, la torture, le viol et le meurtre de milliers de personnes, y compris des enfants, et la déportation forcée d'enfants vers la Russie. On doit se rappeler ces choses qui sont absolument essentielles et on doit les rappeler dans nos parlements. Il y a 162 568 Ukrainiens, femmes et enfants, majoritairement par le biais d'un programme d'autorisation de voyage d'urgence, qui sont venus s'établir au Canada. C'est moins que les pays voisins de l'Ukraine et je tiens à souligner la grande solidarité de ces pays qui ont accueilli au bras ouverts les réfugiés ukrainiens. Je côtoie l'Ukraine à tous les jours à mon bureau sur la colline parlementaire à Ottawa. Irène est mon adjointe administrative. Son nom, c'est Irena. Elle est venue au Canada comme stagiaire pour se mettre en sécurité face à la sauvage agression de la Russie. Elle est intelligente, pétillante, curieuse, mais évidemment toujours soucieuse de ce qui se passe chez elle. Même si on l'appelle Irène plutôt qu'Irena, même si elle adore son travail, Irena souhaite retourner dans son pays. Je sens qu'elle et les autres Ukrainiens qui l'entourent sur la colline parlementaire à Ottawa éprouvent cette haine pour Vladimir Poutine, pour cette guerre illégale qui les a séparés de leurs familles, de leurs amis et de leur pays. Mais en même temps, elle représente la conséquence inattendue pour la Russie. Les victimes de la guerre illégale de Poutine, tout comme Irena, sont maintenant clairsemées partout dans le monde, rappelant les horreurs de la guerre autour d'eux et soudant les peuples contre cette agression sauvage. Irena, comme des milliers d'Ukrainiens, nous rappelle jour après jour la réalité de l'Ukraine. On doit rester unis jusqu'à ce que la Russie se retire complètement de l'Ukraine, qu'elle cesse ses crimes de guerre, qu'elle paie pour les dommages qu'elle a infligés au peuple ukrainien. Collègues, c'est important de travailler ensemble pour faire en sorte qu'Irène, comme des milliers de jeunes Ukrainiennes partout dans le monde, puisse retourner chez elle, dans son pays qu'elle aime tant et où elle veut vivre sa vie. Slava Ukrainia.
Thank you. I will now recognize Ms. Valerie Boyer of France to be followed by Ms. Kirsten Varesh from Germany. Ms. Boyer, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Ms. Boyer, you're recognized for 3
Thank you.
minutes.
Bonne fête nationale à nos hôtes canadiens pour commencer, mes chers collègues, et merci de la chaleur de leur accueil. Bien évidemment, en tant que Française et membre de la délégation française, je suis là pour soutenir les termes du rapport, qui est extrêmement important, et bien sûr pour réaffirmer notre soutien à l'Ukraine, soutien indéfectible à cette courageuse nation. Et je dois vous dire, j'ai été très émue hier par les propos de notre collègue ukrainien, qui était à la fois empreint de réalité et de la grande tristesse que traversent en ce moment nos amis ukrainiens sur notre continent européen. J'interviens aujourd'hui pour le contrôle des armes et la maîtrise des objectifs, qui est un objectif extrêmement important de l'OSCE, parce que nous sommes là aussi pour respecter l'équilibre des situations. Mais je voudrais souligner la position de la France. La France est une grande puissance nucléaire. C'est un pays qui est doté de cette puissance nucléaire. Et la question du nucléaire est une question fondamentale et centrale pour nous, puisque c'est une question de souveraineté nationale. Et enfin, pour conclure, je voudrais souligner 2 points. Le premier, c'est que je soutiendrai les amendements présentés par mon collègue qui n'a pu être là aujourd'hui, Meyer Habib, mon collègue député. Mais je voudrais aussi vous dire hier quelle a été mon émotion lorsque nous avons voté un certain nombre de mesures pour soutenir l'Ukraine, et notamment en parlant de son autonomie, de son indépendance. Et je voudrais que nous ayons une réflexion approfondie et un soutien pour ce qui se passe en ce moment en Arménie. L'Arménie qui va nous accueillir dans quelques mois sur son sol et qui souffre aujourd'hui des attaques absolument inhumaines que mène l'Azerbaïdjan contre l'Arménie. Nous soutenons l'Ukraine. Je crois que l'unanimité, en tout cas la grande majorité, a été faite hier. Mais nous ne pouvons pas rester silencieux sur ce qui se passe aujourd'hui en Arménie. Nous ne pouvons pas continuer à tolérer que des pays, y compris de l'OSCE, continuent leurs exactions sur les Arménies, parlent de terminer le travail de génocide en Arménie, parce que c'est exactement ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. Je ne parle même plus de la situation en Artsakh qui vit un blocus depuis plus de 200 jours aujourd'hui, dans l'indifférence internationale, mais je parle aussi de ce qui se passe pour la République d'Arménie, qui est constamment attaquée. Il y a quelques jours, 4 Arméniens sont encore morts de ces tirs indignes menés par leurs belliqueux voisins. Donc je voudrais vraiment que nous sortions de cette convention de Vancouver avec une résolution forte et digne et à la hauteur de ce que nous représentons aujourd'hui pour un pays de l'OSCE qui souffre énormément. Je vous remercie.
Thank the Speaker. Next, the Chair is going to recognize Mr. Mikita Portorayev from Ukraine, followed by Mr. Tahir Mirkasheli from Azerbaijan. Mr. Portorayev, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, happy Canada Day. Thousands of Ukrainians during 19th and 20th century came to Canada and to the United States looking for freedom, for human rights, and for worthy life. Why? Because they didn't have neither freedom nor human rights nor worthy lives in their own country, on their own land, because their own country was occupied by 2 empires. Now Ukrainians know what they fight for. Now, unfortunately, thousands and even millions of Ukrainians had to leave terminally, we believe, their country again, looking not for human rights or democracy, because we are building democracy in our own country, and we are defending democracy in our own country. They left because they needed protection. And we're thankful to all countries that gave protection to our citizens, to our women, to our children. I think that I will have an opportunity to continue my story about what is happening in Ukraine during coming days. But let me finish my intervention with words of thankfulness to Laurinas for his brilliant report, and let me call colleagues to support the resolution of our committee, because it is strong, it brings strong messages, and, well, you know, sometimes I'm not sure that somebody still can read in Russia, but probably they at least will hear something from our committee. So let's support our resolution, colleagues. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Next, I will recognize Ms. Irene Karalambides from Cyprus, to be followed by Ms. Lilit Minasan from Armenia. Ms. Karalambides, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Happy Canada Day. Dear colleagues, the last week's events concerning the Wagner Group's mutiny have clearly shown how fragile world peace can be. The events directly showed that nobody controlled the Wagner mercenaries, a group with heavy weapons at their disposal, including air defense equipment, combat vehicles, fighter jets, and short-range missiles, was not controlled by anybody. And therefore, nobody could guarantee that they would not, in a desperate move, attack, for example, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or other critical infrastructure. Too much power was ceded to a private military group of criminals that nobody was effectively monitoring, a group that has proved to be both irrational and merciless. It is now obvious that peace in Europe could be jeopardized because of their irresponsibility. This is why this war must end the soonest. The security of all of us is in jeopardy. In addition, damages to the Ukrainian energy and heating infrastructure, to the Karova Dam, and the overall situation around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant are also very alarming for nuclear safety,
especially against the backdrop of Russia's withdrawal from international nuclear non-proliferation agreements. The failure of the OSCE to preserve peace and security in Europe and to collectively prevent Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a significant self-assessment exercise we have to make. Cyprus, for its part, opposes any attempt to violate the borders of any sovereign country and stands united with its partners in the European Union and supports every resolution at the United Nations which condemns the invasion. Furthermore, we continue to provide Ukraine with humanitarian aid and assistance and will continue to do so as long as they are facing an illegal attack. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So I will now recognize Ms. Lalit Minyasan from Armenia to be followed by Mr. Andreas Aebi of Switzerland. Ms. Minyasan, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Happy Canada Day. Dear colleagues, today I want to speak about the role of OSCE EPA in the strengthening of regional security. I think this organization is a part of a big international community and has to be attentive to the other's position. Hope you may know that the International Court of Justice issued a legally binding provisional measure against Azerbaijan and ordered to take all the necessary measures to ensure unimpeded movement of persons, vehicles and cargo along the Lachin corridor in both directions. Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe just recently adopted the resolution and recommendation regarding ensuring free and safe access through the Lachin corridor. The Assembly is extremely worried about the interruption of the free and safe passage through the Lachin corridor and the subsequent deliberate cutting of electricity and gas supplies of the region. It urgently called for addressing the issues of the rights and security of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh through dialogue between Baku and Stepanakert and the natural international involvement in any peace implementation mechanism to be put in place. The Assembly called on Azerbaijan to invite a Council of Europe delegation to visit the Lachin corridor and Nagorno-Karabakh for a fact-finding mission to assess the situation on the ground. European Parliament position. The most recent resolution adopted by the European Parliament denounced the humanitarian consequences of the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, condemned the inaction of Russian peacekeepers, and requesting their replacement by OSCE peacekeepers under UN mandate. US State Department Secretary Blinken expressed deep concern for the worsening humanitarian situation in Nagorno-Karabakh resulting from the blockade of the Lachin corridor. President of the European Council, Charles Michel, President of France, Macron, Chancellor of Germany, all these European leaders mentioned that the rights and security of people of Nagorno-Karabakh should be addressed. Surely, our Azerbaijani colleagues will try to deny all these statements. But it means that Azerbaijan denies the position of the international community. Hope that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly will also address all these issues with concrete statements. Thank you.
Thank you. The interpreters have asked me to ask each of you if you could speak slower and a little more clearly. It would help our interpreters. I know that goes against my admonition to stay within your time limit, but if you could work both into your speeches, I would appreciate it. I'm next going to recognize Mr. Andreas Aebi of Switzerland to be followed by Mr. Richard Kohls. Mr. Aebi, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, herzliche Gratulation zum Canada Day. Ich habe dieses fantastische Land vor 45 Jahren das erste Mal besucht und komme immer wieder gerne zurück. Der OSZE-Raum durchlebt aufgrund des illegalen und illegitimen Angriffskriegs Russlands gegen die Ukraine nach bald 1,5 Jahren Krieg weiterhin besonders düstere Stunden. Die Schweiz verurteilt diesen Krieg und die begangenen Gräueltaten aufs Schärfste. Wir haben in diesen Tagen gesehen, dass Multilateralismus weiterhin von Bedeutung ist. Multilateralismus ist aber kein Zuckerschlecken. Er bedarf Engagement und der Bereitschaft, auch unangenehme Fragen auf die Agenda zu bringen. Ich möchte daran erinnern, dass die OSZE heute eine der wenigen verbleibenden multilateralen Plattformen ist, welche alle an Konflikten beteiligten Parteien an einen Tisch bringen kann. Zur historischen Mission der OSZE, wie auch unserer Versammlung, gehört es, ein multilaterales Forum für den Dialog und für Verhandlungen zu sein. Zu den zentralen Aufgaben dieser Organisation gehört es zudem, Unterstützung zu leisten bei der Konfliktbewältigung. Nun sind wir mit der größten politischen und menschlichen Herausforderung in Europa seit dem Zweiten Weltkrieg konfrontiert. Jetzt kommt es darauf an, den unerschütterlichen Willen zum Dialog, so schwierig und unvorstellbar dieser derzeit auch sein mag, aufrechtzuerhalten, in unserer Versammlung sowie in allen weiteren OSZE-Gremien. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, die Schrecken bewaffneter Konflikte werden uns täglich vor Augen geführt. Angesichts dessen dürfen wir nicht aufgeben. Angesichts der humanitären Tragödie, die das ukrainische Volk tagtäglich erleidet, spreche ich meine vollste Anteilnahme aus. Nichtsdestotrotz rufe ich Sie dazu auf, von jeglichen Schritten abzusehen, welche diese Organisation als Ganzes schwächen könnte. Die OSZE muss als einzige multilaterale Plattform, die über die nötigen Erfahrungen und Instrumente verfügt, um einen Prozess zu begleiten, der zu einem dauerhaften Ausweg aus dieser Krise führt, aufrechterhalten werden. Mir ist bewusst, dass die Schweizer Neutralität in dieser Frage vereinzelt kritisch angesehen wird. Ich betone aber nochmals, unsere Neutralität kann keineswegs als Gleichgültigkeit missverstanden werden. Wir verurteilen den illegalen Angriffskrieg Russlands auf die Ukraine auf das Schärfste und bemühen uns auf den uns möglichen Wegen um die Verbesserung der Lage für die ukrainische Bevölkerung. Meiner Ansicht nach sollte dies auch die Maxime für diese Organisation sein.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Rihards Kols of Latvia to be followed by Mr. Sergejs Handayan from Armenia. Mr. Kols, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, first of all, happy Canada Day to Canadian delegation and all the Canadians. And thank you very much, Kashunas, for the report. And I mean, it's very well balanced. And as you rightly mentioned in your intervention, that things are developing very fast and different intensity, and it's hard to portray everything in a document. This said, I hear more and more, even today, when we talk about Wagner Group, it's a private military company. Well, I guess we have found out just by President Putin himself a few days ago, stating that the Wagner Group is entirely funded by Russian Federation, taxpayers' money. So with this, obviously, there are several countries that have already recognized Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. And I would call all the OEC member states to do the same, for the parliaments to do the same. It is a terrorist organization. It's not only causing havoc right now in eastern Ukraine, it causes different conflicts across the world, be it Africa, be it South America, you name it. And that is an instrument, a tool in possession of Russian regime. And it has to be tackled. Well, we have the Counterterrorism Committee. I think that will be also a job for this committee to address the Wagner Group and designate as a terrorist organization. And that also implies that everything that we have seen, even in Russian Federation, we see it's lawless country. Because even in Russian Federation, PMCs are banned, are not allowed. Whereas we see it's a creation of the state itself, such a company. So with this, of course, I urge member states to designate Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. I don't think they have finished their work. I'm not talking about Ukraine, I'm talking about other countries, be it Syria, be it various African countries as well. And they should be treated as such, especially the war crimes that this group is committing. And since that is funded by Russian state, Russian Federation, it seems the Russian Federation is state sponsor of terrorism. that should be also recognized. Last but not least, another dimension that OSCE should look into, more and more information coming in, that Russia is forcibly sending to the front lines migrants. Migrants being detained in their thousands in Russian Federation and being sent to the front lines. Well, I don't have the hard evidence, but this is something that should be investigated also by the OSCE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. I will now recognize Mr. Sergio Handanyan from Armenia to be followed by Radoslav Fogel from Poland. Mr. Handanyan, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Kashunas for the report and the resolution. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, since the adoption of the Birmingham Declaration, the security situation in South Caucasus and around Armenia continues to deteriorate. The sovereign territory of the Republic of Armenia suffered a brutal aggression of Azerbaijan in September 2022, resulting in occupation of the portions of our sovereign territory. This violence was stopped by the active engagement of the United States. Daily, Azerbaijan violates the ceasefire, shares the positions of the armed forces, civilian infrastructure, and civilian population in the bordering areas of Armenia. Recently, Azerbaijan has also started to target the economic independence and development of my country, shelling the metallurgical plant being built with the US investments. Fortunately, now there is a mechanism in place registering the ceasefire violations and border tensions on Armenian side and reporting to a number of member countries of this assembly. I'm talking about the European Union Civilian Monitoring Mission deployed in Armenia for 2 years that aims to contribute to stability in border areas, for which I want to extend my gratitude to all EU member countries for agreeing to deploy the mission, and especially Austria, Romania, Slovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia for their active engagement in advocating for this decision. The same mechanism was offered to Azerbaijan as well by the European Union, but Azerbaijan refused to accept it. Guess why? This fact clearly demonstrates who is the aggressor in this conflict. Dear colleagues, as in other conflict contexts, we clearly indicate who is the aggressor and who is the victim. It is important to specify in this context as well. It helps to address the issues and find solutions for them. The amendments that I propose to this resolution serve this purpose. And I believe that the parliamentary platform of the OSCE needs to be more active in strengthening the role and engagement of the organization in the South Caucasus region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had a number of speakers added to the list, and I'm afraid we're going to run over time. And so I'm going to ask your indulgence to reduce the time to 2 minutes for the following interventions. So I will now recognize Mr. Radoslav Fogel from Poland to be followed by Mr. Devor Bernardic from Croatia. Mr. Fogel, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by thanking our rapporteur, dear Laurinas. You made great work with such a comprehensive report and well-put resolution draft. From my perspective, it's very important that we include Belarus as well, both in terms of the upcoming Wagner's group presence there, but also when it comes to the Russian plans of deploying nuclear weapons on the Belarusian soil. This further deteriorates the security situation in the region and in the whole of Europe. We are discussing the Russian aggression against Ukraine for quite some time already, and it's shameful that we weren't able to suspend Russia's membership for more than a year from the start of the war. But we should continue very clearly naming the deeds of Russian regime, and both in this parliamentary assembly and in our national parliaments use any means necessary to further pursue this goal and to hold those responsible accountable. This also includes, of course, seizing the Russian assets and creating the International Tribunal for for a war of aggression. And I really hope that this assembly and this organization won't be held hostage by Russians, for instance, when it comes to the upcoming presidency of OSCE. I strongly encourage everyone to make courageous decisions in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Davor Bernardic from Croatia to be followed by Ms. Farah Karimi from the Netherlands. Mr. Bernardic, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone on behalf of the Croatian delegation, and congratulations of Canada National Day to our Canadian friends and colleagues. First of all, I think that it's really important that our organization, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, showed unity in condemning Russian aggression, and I think it's equally important that we take further steps in this session as well. That's the reason Croatia strongly supports this declaration. As I have already emphasized many times, Croatia came out of the war only 25 years ago, and we have great experience in building a post-conflict society. In the 90s, Croatia defended itself against significantly superior and armed Yugoslav army under the control of Slobodan Milosevic. That war had many similarities with Russian aggression on Ukraine, but on a smaller scale. I think that last week we saw all the weaknesses of the Russian military forces when Wagner Group practically walked into the Russia countryside more than 600 kilometers on its way to Moscow. This was probably because all Russian army is in Ukraine right now. So it's no longer a question whether Ukraine will win the war. It surely will. The question is how it will look like post-conflict society. What our experience teaches us that after the war, the most important thing is the integration of fighters into society. Ukraine has more than 1 million people under arms. But also, another important topic is that we have a situation where there will be a lot of illegal weapons on the market and private military groups on the field, which means that this will be a big security issue and challenge for all countries of OSCE. Also, as we concluded at the winter session, the founding of an international criminal court is also a necessity. That court will not bring all the war criminals to justice, heal all the pain, but it will create foundations for reconciliation. This is what our experience with Serbia teaches us. Once again, I want to thank Ukrainian friends and delegation for their great energy and effort in this organization with beliefs and hopes that Ukraine will soon become deliberated. I hope that sooner or later we will have summer annual session on Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Ms. Farah Karimi from the Netherlands to be followed by Mr. De Fosse from Belgium. Ms. Karimi, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our rapporteur for his comprehensive report and the resolution which we support strongly. This resolution, combined with the supplementary item approved by the General Assembly yesterday, delivers a strong message against Russian aggression and stands in solidarity with the Ukrainian people's pursuit of sovereignty, self-determination, and human rights. We must ensure that those in Russia responsible for the war crimes and crimes against humanity face justice. The Dutch citizens are firmly behind this cause, as demonstrated by our government's political, financial, and military support to Ukraine, as well as the remarkable generosity of our people who have opened their homes and hearts to over 130,000 Ukrainian refugees. Our commitment to this endeavor remains high. At the same time, all efforts should be directed to ending the war, and as you, Mr. Chair, mentioned in your opening remarks, this madness must stop as soon as possible. Ukrainian people, women, men, and children are killed every day. The OSCE's very existence aims to achieve the security of European people through dialogue and cooperation is now under significant threat. Operating with no unified budget approved, we don't know which country will be the next chairperson in office in 2014, no clarity about key positions by January 1st, 2024. What will remain of OSCE by end of this year is a real question. It is apparent that the Russian agenda seeks to shape the OSCE according to their own preferences, disregarding the human dimension of security or dismantling the organization altogether. In light of this critical situation, we must not only voice strong statements, but also take immediate action as representatives of our people in our national parliaments. In addition, we need a strong agenda and action plan from our Assembly and our incoming President. He or she, armed with the declaration from Vancouver, must immediately act towards the executive bodies of the OSCE, delivering the message of our Assembly. Our objective is to end this madness, and we need an OSCE to help to reach that.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. De Fosse from Belgium to be followed by Mr. Rosati from Poland. Mr. De Fosse, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Chers collègues, je commencerai en remerciant et félicitant notre rapporteur, M. Kashunas, pour la qualité de son rapport. En introduction, je voudrais à nouveau condamner Vladimir Poutine et son clan dans les termes les plus fermes pour la guerre d'agression non justifiée qu'il mène contre l'Ukraine et pour les crimes de guerre abjects dont ils se rendent coupables envers la population ukrainienne. Je veux aussi dénoncer les crimes contre l'environnement qui mettent en danger le futur de ce pays et sa capacité de résilience quand la guerre aura pris fin. Je veux enfin redire mon soutien et mon admiration envers la population ukrainienne, mais également envers les citoyens russes qui, aujourd'hui, osent s'opposer à leur gouvernement autoritaire, impérialiste et dangereux pour la sécurité européenne et plus largement pour la sécurité mondiale. Je voudrais attirer votre attention, chers collègues, sur un point en particulier. En effet, aujourd'hui, les votes sur les résolutions liées à cette guerre lors des assemblées générales de l'ONU a montré que de nombreux pays africains, asiatiques et sud-américains n'affichent pas un soutien sans faille à l'Ukraine. De plus, on constate que plusieurs pays africains, notamment le Mali, mais d'autres aussi, ont fait le choix de signer des accords avec les milices de Wagner au détriment des forces européennes et onusiennes. C'est un signal clair que le manque de cohérence dans les prises de position internationales des pays dits de l'Occident a durablement abîmé la confiance et la coopération entre ces pays et le nôtre. Le manque de réaction forte par rapport à la guerre qui ravage l'Est du Congo depuis des années, les attitudes colonialistes des pays occidentaux, le silence sur les politiques violentes et les violations des droits humains et du droit international menées par d'autres pays que l'on considère comme amis, les relations économiques et commerciales avec des pays non démocratiques mais extracteurs d'énergie fossile, le non-respect des règles de droit international lors d'interventions de l'OTAN ou par exemple lors de l'invasion américaine de l'Irak, toutes ces incohérences entre le discours et les actes mettent aujourd'hui en difficulté les pays qui se disent défenseurs de la démocratie, du droit international et de l'état de droit. Chers collègues, l'hypocrisie nous mène à la mise en danger de nos valeurs. Chacun de nos pays doit donc adopter une attitude cohérente, une cohérence totale dans nos actions et nos paroles sur le plan international afin de retrouver une adhésion massive par les États de la communauté internationale aux valeurs démocratiques et de respect du droit que nous prétendons défendre. Je vous remercie. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Rosati from Poland to be followed by Dr. Daniela de Ritter from Germany. Mr. Rosati, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Let me congratulate first Mrs. Kashunas for excellent report. I think I judge it from the discussion that we are more or less in agreement, all of us, as far as the main points of the report are concerned. I think the report makes clear that, first of all, Russia is fully responsible for this unprecedented aggression, and I think this is one point we have to stress again and again, looking forward and preparing a reconstruction for Ukraine. We have to make clear that Russia bears the responsibility, and Russia will be responsible for providing financial assistance to this reconstruction. I also appreciate the call of the report to the member states of the OSCE organization to maintain unity and maintain resolve and determination in providing support for Ukraine, both military, financial, and humanitarian. I must say I'm very impressed by the unity in this hall, and I hope we can continue like that also for future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Dr. Daniela de Ritter from Germany to be followed by Ms. Ellen Semyon from Belgium. Dr. de Ritter, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Auch ich möchte den kanadischen Kolleginnen und Kollegen ganz herzlich danken für die Einladung und dass wir hier am Kanada Day sprechen können über den Krieg in der Ukraine, den Aggressionskrieg, den Russland ausgelöst hat, ist uns eine besondere Ehre. Ich möchte auch die Gelegenheit nutzen, dem Kollegen Kasounas herzlich zu danken, auch für die Würdigung meiner Arbeit als Sonderbeauftragte und die ausdrückliche Erwähnung in seinem Bericht über die Arbeit, die ich als Sonderbeauftragte für Osteuropa vornehmen konnte. Unsere Agenda, das stimmt, ist erneut geprägt von dem Aggressionskrieg Russlands gegen die Ukraine. Ich will aber ergänzend auch zu dem Bericht sagen und unterstreichen, was schon Kolleginnen und Kollegen vor mir gesagt haben, dass nämlich der Aufstand der Wagner-Söldnergruppe letztes Wochenende gezeigt hat, dass das russische Regime keineswegs stabil ist und hinter den Kulissen innerhalb der Eliten ein Machtkampf tobt, wie immer der auch ausgehen wird. Putin ist, das können wir alle miteinander beobachten, politisch geschwächt und hat seinen Nimbus als unangefochtener Alleinherrscher Russlands inzwischen eingebüßt. Gerade deshalb sollten wir uns aber nicht beruhigen, denn wir sollten uns deutlich vor Augen führen, dass Russland seinen imperialistischen Angriffskrieg mit unverminderter Härte weiter fortführt und Stärke zu demonstrieren versucht. Mit der Sprengung des Kachowska-Dammes hat Russland Krieg gegen die Ukraine noch mal eine weitere Eskalationsstufe erfahren. Und wir müssen uns klar machen, dass es Wiederaufbauhilfe braucht. Die Weltbank schätzt die kriegsbedingten Wiederaufbaukosten inzwischen auf mehr als 400 Milliarden $. Und die Geberkonferenz letzte Woche in London mit 600 Teilnehmerstaaten muss uns Ermutigung und Ansporn zugleich sein, auch das Thema der Wiedergutmachung auf die Agenda zu setzen. Ein Aktionsplan ist dringend notwendig und ich wünsche dafür dem zukünftigen Präsidium viel Glück und Erfolg.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Ellen Samyan from Belgium to be followed by Mr. Tahir Mirkashili from Azerbaijan. Ms. Samyan, you recognize for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I support this resolution. However, I regret that only 2 paragraphs of this resolution refer to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Let us be honest, even indirectly, because the words Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh are not even mentioned. Unjustly, because what the Christian Armenian population has suffered again since September 2020 cannot be emphasized enough. Let us also not forget the heinous war crimes committed by the Azeris on the Armenian population in Artsakh. And I also do not see any ambition from the OSCE in the text, especially the Minsk group, which is supposed to be its main purpose, doing efforts to find a peaceful solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Of course, we applaud any diplomatic efforts, but only talks between the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia, led by, for example, Charles Michel, but without representation from the Republic of Artsakh, which should be an important element and basis in further talks and the peace process. A place for Artsakh's representation at the negotiating table is a conditio sine qua non. And then I come seamlessly to the Lachin corridor. For more than 200 days now, the Lachin corridor has been blocked with all the humanitarian consequences that entails. In addition, on April 23rd, Azerbaijan set up a checkpoint on that corridor. The blockade and the checkpoint led to serious health problems in the region, to food and fuel shortages. Some 120,000 Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh currently lack access to essential goods and services, such as vital medicines and medical care. Hospitals in Nagorno-Karabakh can no longer perform vital surgeries, and the serious ill must be taken to the Armenian motherland via the only connecting road, the Lachin corridor, where they have to wait for authorization and at the checkpoint. This has already cost a lot of human suffering and lives. I close, colleagues, by saying that we do support this resolution, but as I mentioned, I regret that these important elements about Artsakh were not included in this resolution.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Tahir Mirkashili of Azerbaijan to be followed by Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland. Mr. Mirkashili, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I also want to congratulate Mr. Kasounas for a very nice and comprehensive report. Dear colleagues, we face a peculiar situation when the more dynamism and progress we observe in the bilateral negotiations, the rhetoric of Armenian delegation is getting more aggressive and more uncompromising. As stated, Foreign Minister of Armenia and Azerbaijan has just concluded the next round of negotiation on the peace treaty in Washington, D.C. this week, facilitated by United States Secretary Antony Blinken, and the statements issued by both sides provide reason for optimism. By the way, I want to thank the United States also for supporting peace in our regions. Azerbaijan firmly believes that achieving lasting peace and stability in the regions can only be accomplished through direct bilateral negotiations with Armenia. As to the situation on the Lachen Road, presenting it as a blockade is nothing but false propaganda. Azerbaijan has never created impediment for the movement on the road for humanitarian purposes. In fact, it was Armenia who attacked the checkpoint in an attempt to create obstacles for the safe and unimpeded passage of Armenian residents along the Russian road. We should not forget that this attack occurred when Armenia's persistent efforts to discourage Armenian residents from using the Lachen border checkpoint has failed, and Armenia chose this way to stop the movement. We do not accept any criticism on human rights from Armenia, the country that unleashed the war against neighbor country and occupied around 20% of its territory, carried out ethnic cleansing on a massive scale, committing other crimes during the conflict, including crimes against humanity and propagating racist ideology. Moreover, Armenia has a solid track of human rights violation at home and international law. Against this background, Armenia should speak about fulfillment of its own obligation under international humanitarian law and international human rights law, which is consistently violated during 30 years long occupation of the territory of Azerbaijan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now recognize Ms. Pia Kalma from Finland to be followed by Mr. Terrell Ganjaliev from Azerbaijan. Ms. Kalma, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Dear Mr. Chair, all international organizations have their role to play in international security. OSCE is not a legal entity, and therefore it cannot, for example, impose sanctions. However, we as OSCE parliamentarians can encourage other organizations like European Union and individual countries to do so. The best way of helping Ukraine is giving them military equipment. My country, Finland, has already donated Ukraine more than 15 aid packages worth of more than €1 billion, and including Leopard battle tanks, helmets, and other kinds of military supplies. I think we should encourage our governments to continue to do so, because that seems to be the only way forward. This war has been a terrible tragedy for Ukraine, but it has also affected other European countries. We all remember last winter when the prices of natural gas were surging and shortage of energy was facing us all. And we all know about what is happening with the inflation. Dear Mr. Chair, I would like to thank Rapporteur Kashunas for his excellent report. The paragraph 32 especially, regarding OSCE's toolbox and how to strengthen it, is extremely important. We need to make sure that what is happening now in Ukraine is not happening in any other place in the world.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Terrell Ganjaliev from Azerbaijan. Okay. Cindy's not present. Well, thank you. We have concluded our debate on time, and I think it's been an excellent discussion. I want to thank all of my colleagues. We will start our consideration of amendments and our draft resolution tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll see you there. We stand adjourned. Thank you.